extended at full length on the sofa, with his heels in the air, and a newspaper in his hand. Madame Mantalini led the way down a flight of stairs, and through a passage, to a large room at the back of the premises, where were a number of young women employed in sewing, cutting out, making up, altering, and various other processes known only to those who are cunning in the arts of millinery and dressmaking. It was a close room with a skylight, and as dull and quiet as a room need be. On Madame Mantalini calling aloud for Miss Knag, a short, bustling, overdressed female, full of importance, presented herself, and all the young ladies suspending their operations for the moment, whispered to each other sundry criticisms upon the make and texture of Miss Nickleby's dress, her complexion, cast of features, and personal appearance, with as much good breeding as could have been displayed by the very best society in a crowded ballroom. 'Oh, Miss Knag,' said Madame Mantalini, 'this is the young person I spoke to you about.' Miss Knag bestowed a reverential smile upon Madame Mantalini, which she dexterously transformed into a gracious one for Kate, and said that certainly, although it was a great deal of trouble to have young people who were wholly unused to the business, still she was sure the young person would try to do her best, impressed with which conviction she, Miss Knag, felt an interest in her already. 'I think that for the present, at all events, it will be better for Miss Nickleby to come into the showroom with you and try things on for people,' said Madame Mantalini. 'She will not be able for the present to be of much use in any other way, and her appearance will ' 'Suit very well with mine, Madame Mantalini,' interrupted Miss Knag. 'So it will, and to be sure I might have known that you would not be long in finding that out, for you have so much taste in all those matters, that really, as I often say to the young ladies, I do not know how, when, or where you possibly could have acquired all you know. Miss Nickleby and I are quite a pair, Madame Mantalini, only I am a little darker than Miss Nickleby, and I think my foot may be a little smaller. Miss Nickleby, I am sure, will not be offended at my saying that, when she hears that our family has always been celebrated for small feet ever since our family had any feet at all. Indeed, I think. I had an uncle once, Madame Mantalini, who lived in Cheltenham, and had a most excellent business as a tobacconist, who had such small feet that they were no bigger than those which are usually joined to wooden legs. The most symmetrical feet, Madame Mantalini, that even you can imagine.' 'They must have had something of the appearance of club feet, Miss Knag,' said Madame. 'Well now, that is so like you,' returned Miss Knag. 'Ha, ha, ha! Of club feet! Oh, very good! As I often remark to the young ladies, well, I must say, and I do not care who knows it, of all the ready humour I've ever heard anywhere, and I've heard a good deal, for when my dear brother was alive I kept house for him, Miss Nickleby, we had to supper once a week 2 or 3 young men, highly celebrated in those days for their humour, Madame Mantalini. Of all the ready humour, I say to the young ladies, I ever heard, Madame Mantalini's is the most remarkable. It's so gentle, so sarcastic, and yet so good natured, as I was observing to Miss Simmonds only this morning, that how, or when, or by what means she acquired it, is to me a mystery indeed.' Here Miss Knag paused to take breath, and while she pauses, it may be observed, not that she was marvellously loquacious and marvellously deferential to Madame Mantalini, since these are facts which require no comment, but that every now and then she was accustomed, in the torrent of her discourse, to introduce a loud, shrill, clear hem, the import and meaning of which was variously interpreted by her acquaintance, some holding that Miss Knag dealt in exaggeration, and introduced the monosyllable when any fresh invention was in the course of coinage in her brain; others, that when she wanted a word, she threw it in to gain time, and prevent anybody else from striking into the conversation. It may be further remarked that Miss Knag still aimed at youth, although she had shot beyond it years ago, and that she was weak and vain, and one of those people who are best described by the axiom, that you may trust them as far as you can see them, and no farther. 'You'll take care that Miss Nickleby understands her hours, and so forth,' said Madame Mantalini, 'and so I'll leave her with you. You'll not forget my directions, Miss Knag?' Miss Knag, of course, replied that to forget anything Madame Mantalini had directed was a moral impossibility, and that lady, dispensing a general good morning among her assistants, sailed away. 'Charming creature, isn't she, Miss Nickleby?' said Miss Knag, rubbing her hands together. 'I have seen very little of her,' said Kate. 'I hardly know yet.' 'Have you seen Mr. Mantalini?' inquired Miss Knag. 'Yes, I have seen him twice.' 'Isn't HE a charming creature?' 'Indeed, he does not strike me as being so, by any means,' replied Kate. 'No, my dear!' cried Miss Knag, elevating her hands. 'Why, goodness gracious mercy, where's your taste? Such a fine, tall, full whiskered, dashing, gentlemanly man, with such teeth and hair, and well, now, you do astonish me.' 'I dare say I am very foolish,' replied Kate, laying aside her bonnet; 'but as my opinion is of very little importance to him or anyone else, I do not regret having formed it, and shall be slow to change it, I think.' 'He's a very fine man, don't you think so?' asked one of the young ladies. 'Indeed he may be, for anything I could say to the contrary,' replied Kate. 'And drives very beautiful horses, doesn't he?' inquired another. 'I dare say he may, but I never saw them,' answered Kate. 'Never saw them!' interposed Miss Knag. 'Oh well, there it is at once, you know. How can you possibly pronounce an opinion about a gentleman, if you don't see him as he turns out altogether?' There was so much of the world, even of the little world of the country girl, in this idea of the old milliner, that Kate, who was anxious for every reason to change the subject, made no further remark, and left Miss Knag in possession of the field. After a short silence, during which most of the young people made a closer inspection of Kate's appearance, and compared notes respecting it, one of them offered to help her off with her shawl, and the offer being accepted, inquired whether she did not find black very uncomfortable wear. 'I do indeed,' replied Kate, with a bitter sigh. 'So dusty and hot,' observed the same speaker, adjusting her dress for her. Kate might have said that mourning is sometimes the coldest wear which mortals can assume; that it not only chills the breasts of those it clothes, but, extending its influence to summer friends, freezes up their sources of goodwill and kindness, and, withering all the buds of promise that once so liberally put forth, leaves nothing but bared and rotten hearts exposed. There are few who have lost a friend or relative constituting in life their sole dependence, who have not keenly felt this chilling influence of their sable garb. She had felt it acutely, and feeling it at the moment, could not quite restrain her tears. 'I am very sorry to have wounded you by my thoughtless speech,' said her companion. 'I did not think of it. You are in mourning for some near relation?' 'For my father,' answered Kate. 'For what relation, Miss Simmonds?' asked Miss Knag, in an audible voice. 'Her father,' replied the other softly. 'Her father, eh?' said Miss Knag, without the slightest depression of her voice. 'A long illness, Miss Simmonds?' 'Hush!' replied the girl. 'I don't know.' 'Our misfortune was very sudden,' said Kate, turning away, 'or I might, perhaps, at a time like this, be enabled to support it better.' There had existed not a little desire in the room, according to invariable custom when any new young person came, to know who Kate was, and what she was, and all about her; but although it might have been very naturally increased by her appearance and emotion, the knowledge that it pained her to be questioned was sufficient to repress even this curiosity; and Miss Knag, finding it hopeless to attempt extracting any further particulars just then, reluctantly commanded silence, and bade the work proceed. In silence, then, the tasks were plied until half past one, when a baked leg of mutton, with potatoes to correspond, were served in the kitchen. The meal over, and the young ladies having enjoyed the additional relaxation of washing their hands, the work began again, and was again performed in silence, until the noise of carriages rattling through the streets, and of loud double knocks at doors, gave token that the day's work of the more fortunate members of society was proceeding in its turn. One of these double knocks at Madame Mantalini's door announced the equipage of some great lady, or rather rich one, for there is occasionally a distinction between riches and greatness, who had come with her daughter to approve of some court dresses which had been a long time preparing, and upon whom Kate was deputed to wait, accompanied by Miss Knag, and officered, of course, by Madame Mantalini.